I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Roman Sheremeta with us today. He is a professor of economics. He's Ukrainian. He's living and working in the United States right now. I've had the privilege of interviewing him before. He's obviously an incredibly smart gentleman, but also someone that follows what's going on in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, very closely. And he's been very prolific in commenting on this summit that occurred on Friday between Putin and Trump. And you've been pretty negative in your review, sir. And tell me why. What do you think?
Well, my counter question would be why should we be positive? I mean, there was no agreement on the ceasefire. We have welcomed a war criminal to the United States, put the red carpet in front of him, basically humiliated ourselves. We have invited him to the table. Just imagine this happening in 1940s, after all the Holocaust atrocities have been unveiled, and we are inviting Hitler to the United States. I mean, that would have been. It would be crazy, right, to even think about this. But that's exactly what happened. So, and not only we have done that, but there was nothing agreed upon. There is no ceasefire. There's no sanctions. There is no even understanding what has happened on Friday. So, absolutely, I'm critical. The bombing continues today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. The killing continues. The kidnapping of children continues. What's to be happy about?
Well, they're trying to get peace. It would appear that Trump believes he's got something agreed to. He's spoken to NATO and NATO leaders and Zelensky. Don't you think there's something that is agreed to? Is he's just keeping it close to his vest for a while?
Look, Trump said that he's going to stop this war in 24 hours. Then he pushed this to a month, then 2 months, then half a year. He said 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks. He repeated it like so many times. Then there was a deadline on August 8th, and these deadlines have passed. Nothing has happened. This is just unrealistic. When you need to think about what to expect or how to read him, I mean, you need to look at the past performance, and that is predictive of what is happening. So, no, I don't believe anything has happened. I just believe, and Putin came very strategically prepared. This is something to applaud him for. He was completely ready. He flattered him. He said all the right things. He said that if he were president in 2020, the war would have never started, that Trump lost election because it was rigged and everything, literally repeating everything that Trump wanted to hear. I mean, there was a 10 out of 10 diplomacy, or maybe not diplomacy is not the right word, but 10 out of 10 in
Flattery.
terms of flattery. Right. And so it worked. It worked marvelously. Trump somehow believes now that things are going to get moving. And I mean, based on the past performance, and I know how my friends took part in Minsk negotiations. My friends that I know who were in the room negotiating the peace ceasefire since 2014. And they all fell for the same trap, these false promises for Putin and some sort of hopeful expectations that things gonna get better. It's just not. It's just wishful thinking.
You posted that the bravest person was a female reporter who asked Putin the toughest questions. What were they, sir?
Well, I think that was very brave, and it happened actually a couple times. We actually, by now, I believe we even have an idea who that reporter was, and she basically said, "When will you stop killing civilians?" I mean, that was the a very strong statement. It wasn't going around the bush. I mean, this is something that if you really wanted to stop peace, you would start off with that question, right? I mean, when are you going to stop killing civilians? When are you going to stop kidnapping children and return those children back to Ukraine? And of course, the fact that there was no um, basically meeting or question and answer with journalists after the press conference. I mean, it was just non-existent, right? Trump gave only one exclusive interview to Fox, and that was it. I mean, that is very strange for the meetings like that. And my friends, journalists who were present in the room, they said that they felt like they didn't know anything at the end of the meeting, and so that is telling in itself.
Well, do we know anything? Like we know they chatted. We know that Putin flattered Trump, but we don't know any details of whatever deal they
Nothing.
agreed to.
Nothing. The only thing we know is some tweets that Trump has posted on Saturday, basically saying that, hey, we decided to go right away to the um, not to the ceasefire, but to the permanent peace, which is ridiculous, because how can you even start negotiation and everything while the guns are being fired? So the first step that everybody was expecting from President Trump was to agree to a ceasefire and start negotiation process. And if there's no ceasefire, then everybody was expecting sanctions and some sort of pressure that would be put on Russia. Now, obviously, there is no ceasefire, so the expectation was that there will be some actions from Trump. No actions are following. In fact, he has just reiterated that he's not planning to put any pressure on Russia because everything is great, because he felt really good with Putin.
It seemed almost like it was more of a business deal. There were a whole bunch of Russian businessmen that attended, I understand, and Putin bragged about trade being up. What was it, 25% or something like this since
20%, I believe. Yeah.
Trump has come to office, which in a world of severe sanctions against Ukraine, sorry, against Russia. I'm not sure that was actually maybe a Freudian slip against Russia. I'm not sure how that actually happened and what it has been of. He's putting sanctions against India because India is buying goods, oil from Russia. How can the trade between Russia and the United States be up by 20%? It's a little bit illogical. Um,
It is a strange world that we live in, Brian, and there's a couple comments that I want to make. First of all, that slip that you said sanctions against Ukraine, it's actually not a slip because at one of the press conferences with Trump, it was a couple months ago when he was making these phone calls with Putin and trying to put pressure. He literally said that in the press conference that he's considering placing sanctions not only on Russia, but actually on Ukraine to force Ukraine to capitulate, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is unheard of. But hey, it's on the record. It's for the history. So yeah, there is even that possibility, and it would be very telling to see what will happen if Zelensky or Ukrainian government in general or Ukrainian people as a whole basically decline the offer that Putin makes or Trump makes, and what will be next from his perspective. So that's my first comment. My second comment about the sanctions against India. So I don't view sanctions against India in any way as a kind of anti-Russian move by Trump. So you have to understand that Trump has this agenda. It's a mistaken belief, some sort of maybe because of his lack of knowledge of economics or no advisory board, economic advisory board, or whatever it is. But he believes that by sanctioning putting tariffs on everybody, that somehow United States is going to win and we're going to live well. Well, we just paying higher prices. But nonetheless, that's his policy. He wants to place tariffs on India, on other countries, and now he has an excuse. He says, "Oh, I'm putting this on India because I want to hurt Russia." No, he's putting that on India because he believes in that that's the way to handle business with India. And these sanctions are, or let's say tariffs, are relatively minor. The 25%, that's he put these numbers on Canada, on his allies in all the NATO's countries. He put the flat tax or tariff 15% on all European countries. So no, I don't see that as any way pressure on Russia. This is just the deal making with India.
You're a professor of economics, correct?
Absolutely.
Does this tariff strategy make any sense?
No sense whatsoever. It doesn't make sense theoretically. So when we analyze how the tariffs work, we know who pays the tariffs. The burden is usually falls on the more inelastic side of the demand and supply curve. It falls on the consumers. So consumers end up paying the higher portion of this tax, and it is a tax. It's plainly a tax placed on mostly consumers. So Americans are the ones who are paying this tax. So from that perspective, sure, if you want to raise tax revenue, which is not a Republican sort of move, right? The Republicans have always been anti-tax or reducing tax burden. And the fact that you are now placing tax as a Republican representative, that doesn't make any sense. But more so, it doesn't make sense also empirically, because if you look at the historical depressions, recessions in the United States, it all would start with some sort of protectionism, high tariffs, and you see a recession happening. Right now, we already see that inflation is picking up, really picking up in the United States. We've been going down, down, down for the past 4 years. We had quite a significant inflation after COVID because of all the money that was put into the system. But then we started to fight that inflation, and it was going down to the 2% targeted inflation by the Federal Reserve. And now we're back up again. So the inflation is picking up, and it's going to get only worse as these tariffs take place. So I don't see any sense in it. I don't see any reason for it. It's just blatant economic ignorance.
So you made a comment just a minute ago that numerous recessions have been caused, or depressions have been caused by tariffs. Lots of people watched that one movie that talked about the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. What was that famous movie, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where the teacher talked about that. But let's talk about it. So the 1930s, when else? I've heard about the 1890s. Are there really historical experiences where high tariffs, protectionist measures have caused depressions or recessions?
Well, so again, depression and recessions, those are very kind of significant events. Those are the contractions in GDP for a prolonged period of time. So it's usually a compilation of factors. So for financial crisis of 2008 and 9, I mean, that was a quite significant event in itself. So a better way to look at this is to look at the data. When you place tariffs, if your country places tariffs, and you can then examine what happens to the prices, right, of those goods that are being imported, other substitutions. So the idea was the belief that if we're going to put tariffs on these bilateral trades, that somehow the American companies are going to move back to producing in America, and they're going to be more competitive, and that will cause the prices to go down when our cost of labor is exponentially higher than it is in India, Vietnam, or China. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, sure, maybe some companies, maybe 5% or whatever, will increase their presence in the United States, but that will come at a significant increase of the prices. And we already seen this happen in 2018. There is actually economic studies that have been published and showing the negative impact the tariffs have on the both the GDP growth and on the prices. So it's just an empirical fact that we know by now. And out of all of the economists that I know, and I know hundreds of them, out of all the Nobel laureates that I know, and I know dozens of them, not a single one of them would say that the current policy of Trump makes any sense. Not a single one of them. The only people that may say some support will be some marginalized faculty at the some random universities in the middle of nowhere, but basically not a single respected economist would say that this is a meaningful economic policy.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with our guest, Roman Sheremeta, professor of economics and a Ukrainian, talking about this summit in Alaska between President Putin and President Trump. I'm going to come back and ask him about security guarantees, because it was almost as if Russia was demanding more security guarantees than, I thought Ukraine would demand and deserve, and that was all where the attention was. Stay with us, everyone. We're going to be back in just 2 minutes.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Roman Sheremeta with me tonight. He's a PhD. He's a professor of economics at the Weatherhood School of Management at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States. He's also a founding rector of the American University in Kyiv. He earned his PhD in economics from Purdue University. And I got to tell you this, he's received numerous research and teaching accolades, including the 2018 Smith Ascending Scholar Prize for a budding genius in social science. I got to ask you about what ranks as a budding genius. Sheremeta was recognized as a top economic thinker of Ukrainian descent by Forbes in 2015, a top-rated young economist globally by Ideas in 2018, and the best 40 under 40 professors by Poets and Quants in 2019. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he has been actively engaged in delivering humanitarian aid and working on various initiatives to rebuild Ukraine, including the National Recovery Council, an advisory board to the president of Ukraine. He's a board member of Save Ukraine and Ukrainian American House, organizations dedicated to returning kidnapped Ukrainian children and supporting Ukrainian people. Professor Sheremeta, thank you so much again for joining us. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I got to ask you, what did you win this Budding Genius Award for? Must have done something fantastic.
Yeah, so this was a work that I started as a PhD student at Purdue, and that work was on contest, conflict, tournaments. So imagine any scenario when you have two parties going against each other to win a scarce resource, and they exert some resources. And so the way that I approached this problem was instead of just looking in the real world data and trying to decipher what's happening in these sort of situations, I decided to run some experiments and so collect the data myself. So I would actually set up these artificial conflicts, artificial competitions, and that created actually a significant support from the academic field. A lot of people joined the wagon, and so now there is in experimental and behavioral economics, there is a field of contest theory, and so my name is kind of engraved in that part, and that's what mostly the prize was given to me for. And it was actually besides the recognition, which was great, it was also coming with a check of $50,000, which was nice too.
So I did a course in, I guess, something comparable to what you're talking about. It was all about the prisoner's dilemma and numerous studies about how to best win that conflict between two people in a prisoner's dilemma. And I thought the answer of all that was tit for tat was the best policy. And so
that's right.
That comes back to this current situation, is that shouldn't Trump have done something if he didn't
Absolutely.
get what he wanted? Like to not do tit for tat, is he not acceding to Putin and encouraging Putin to move forward? Like, tell me how your theory actually applies to the current situation, if you could. And am I right that tit for tat is the right answer?
So the idea here is, if you want to sustain cooperation, which we all want, right? It's some sort of a good state of the world. The very useful strategy, dynamic strategy, that has proven to work really well, both in simulations, in experiments and in the real world is tit for tat. So basically, if you see the aggression from the other side, you respond with aggression. If you
But
see
but
concession, then you
equal
respond with concession.
equal aggression, matched aggression. Is that not correct?
That's correct. So here's the thing. You see that Russia is attacking Ukraine and killing more civilians, which has happened since Trump became president. The number of civilians that is killed, the number of attacks that have been launched against Ukraine have tripled. In some cases, it's even tenfold if we're talking about cities like Odessa. So basically, if you see that sort of escalation, in order to prevent Putin, we should have been leveling up even higher sanctions, giving Ukraine even more weapons to defend itself. Instead, we actually took away what that was promised. We didn't give them anything new, which only emboldened Putin to do even more atrocities, and he continues to do so. And we are not doing anything. So this doesn't make any sense. And especially coming from somebody who tries to sell himself as a great negotiator, the art of the deal and everything it's just laughable. The person doesn't know what they're talking about.
So going back to the theory that I took, it's that at some point in time, you got to get out of the tit for tat, and you've got to cooperate once to see if the other person will cooperate.
That's correct.
And so therefore you got to give the person a chance to get out of the constant back and forth. But if they don't cooperate, then you should go to double tit for tat and really discipline them.
That's correct.
Shouldn't we have not just done what you said, but done what you said times two?
That's all right. That's exactly right. That's my point. And it's we are losing. We're losing this strategic interaction, because I do believe that Russia has been playing very strategically here. They anticipated the weakness from the West, and so they have escalated aggression. They tried that first with Georgia. Well, first was Chechnya, then Georgia, then Moldova. It's not the first time that they do it. And we're probably going to talk about security guarantees. And it's so laughable that the excuse about NATO expansion, well, we will talk about that. But the point is that Russia has been attacking these neighbors, and they've been seeing what would be the response from the West. And there was none. It was very weak. I mean, Obama's response to Russians' annexation of Crimea was laughable. I mean, it was, we sometimes blame only the Republican side, but the Democrats were no better, especially under President Obama. It was really literally no response whatsoever. And it was horrible. And Obama got peace, Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, for what? For not stopping Russia. And so basically these sort of steps have emboldened Russia to go full-scale invasion in Ukraine in 2022, because strategically they understood that the West is not responding in the way that you have just described.
Okay, so let's talk about security guarantees. On Friday at the press conference, I didn't hear about, and maybe I missed it, anything in regards to security guarantees for Ukraine, but I did hear Putin talk about the needed security guarantees for Russia, which I presume is this contention that part of the reason why this war started was because the threat of NATO expanding to the east and taking in the Baltics and then potentially taking in Ukraine at some point in time in the future, even though that never actually happened. And so therefore, Russia's looking for security guarantees. Tell me, how do you think about this argument about Russia needing security guarantees? Is it real? Was the expansion of NATO to the east really a reason for the invasion, or was it just a manufactured reason? And in addition, what are the security guarantees that you think that the U.S., that NATO needs to provide Ukraine before Zelensky should come to the table?
Yeah. So let's start with a couple points here. First of all, NATO as an excuse, absolutely. That's a part of the Russian narrative, Russian propaganda. It's been pushed, and it's completely false. It's false, especially when you look, for example, at countries like Finland that has joined NATO. And guess what? There is no conflict on the border. In fact, Russia is not even saying anything about that. right? I mean, and the border with Russia and NATO countries has doubled because of Finland joining NATO. So that's just a BS from that perspective. But let me go further. Let's talk about Ukraine. So Ukrainians never wanted to join NATO. In fact, if you look at the polls before 2014, before Russia annexed Crimea, about 20% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO. I remember these conversations with my parents actually when I was a kid, and that's when the Baltics were joining NATO, and I just remember that Ukrainians were always saying, well, we don't want to be in NATO. We don't want our soldiers dying, some other battles. In fact, the constitution of Ukraine had a very specifically would state that we are a sovereign country, that we don't belong to any blocs or any alliances. We just sort of, an independent sovereign country. That was stated in constitution, and less than 20% of Ukrainians actually wanted to join NATO. Then 2014 happens, annexation of Crimea. And the polls are conducted again. Now 50% of Ukrainians want to join NATO. And now, 2022, after Russia's full-scale invasion, more than 90% of Ukrainians want to join NATO. So it's not NATO that is expanding and Russia is defending. It's because of Russia's aggression that people of Ukraine are wanting to join NATO as a way to protect themselves. So direct causation here is the reverse one, when Russia is the aggressor and countries want to defend themselves, so they join these alliances. So that's a very important point to understand for somebody like me, who actually studies causal inferences, not just correlations.
Okay, so
And
let
finally,
me ask you about that for a second, if I could. I recently come back from a trip to Florida on business where I was, interacting with numerous great gentlemen that I really quite like, who are very firm MAGA supporters. And their answer is, well, Brian, think about the Cuban Missile Crisis. So when Russia, was bringing missiles to Cuba, close to American territory, we came the closest to the Third World War we've ever come. We demanded that they withdraw it. So that what's happening with NATO expanding and the Ukraine potentially joining NATO is comparable to the Cuban missile crisis. And how could you imagine that Putin wouldn't respond just the way that John F. Kennedy responded in the Cuban Missile Crisis? How would you respond to that, sir?
Well, I would respond that those are not comparable situations at all. I mean, you're comparing apples to oranges. The very simple fact here is that Russia is the one, okay, so reverse that situation. Russia comes to Cuba and we are not doing anything in response. Okay, we're not doing anything. We're saying, sure, fine, stay there. Because this is exactly what Russia is doing today. They're coming to Ukraine. They're coming to Belarus. They're putting nuclear weapons in Belarus. They're coming to Ukraine, and we're saying, no, it's fine. So it's the reverse order. It's the Russia that is making the first step, and we need to respond to it by saying, no, you cannot go here. No, you cannot invade Ukraine. No, you cannot do this. So it's funny how people use exactly the same story, exactly the same narrative, but they completely twist the causal argument. It's the opposite of what they're saying. So it's, again, as I said, this is why it's so important to look at the data and understand that because of Russia's aggression, because of their first step, that we are responding. Ukrainian people are responding. They're saying, we don't want to have this. So this is a very different scenario, and it's a completely different one than the Cuban missile crisis.
So if one of the issues in this negotiation, either on Friday or coming up this coming week, is going to be that NATO has to guarantee that it will not incorporate Ukraine or it won't move farther east, should NATO agree to that? Should the United States agree to that?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, they should not agree with Russia on anything because, as I said, there is not a single guarantee that you can get from Russia that they would honor. I can quote you hundreds, not of my head, but dozens of my head, of agreements that Russia has violated. So United States also violates agreements. Don't get me wrong. Well, they also have done this many times, but Russia is, famous in this. I mean, one of the most famous one is the Budapest Memorandum. In 1994, Russia becomes one of the main guarantors of Ukrainian sovereignty and independence. They literally saying, "Give us the nuclear weapons, and we will defend you from anybody attacking you." Russia signed that document. They are the one who guaranteed Ukrainians sovereignty. And they are the ones who attacked and annexed Ukraine. Instead of defending them from any invasion, they actually became the invaders themselves. So how can you trust anybody?
Okay,
I mean,
but others signed that agreement as well, correct?
that's correct.
Who
And nobody
signed
else
it?
attacked Ukraine, right?
Okay, but they also didn't defend Ukraine, and they were
They
obliged
didn't. They
to, did they
well,
not?
yeah, we can go there. They didn't defend, but they did provide weapons. They did, especially the United States, did a lot in the initial stages of war. They have provided support in the United Nations until Trump came along, and then basically dismantled all the voting as well. So they did provide assistance to Ukraine in its fight for independence and its fight for survival. Okay, yes, they didn't put the boots on the ground, but in the Budapest Memorandum, to be fair, there was no agreement that the boots on the ground would be provided. But there was an agreement that there will be a support coming from these countries when the war happens, when the invasion or something like along those lines would happen. So for me, the very telling is that the Russia guaranteed protection of Ukraine, and they're the ones who attacked. I mean, there's so many other things that we can just look before 2022, just look at all the videos that are available when publicly Lavrov or Putin is saying, "Are you crazy? We're not going to invade Ukraine." 250,000 troops are standing on the border, and they're saying, "We are not going to invade Ukraine. This is all BS. You guys are all lying." And then a couple days later, they all invade Ukraine. So there's no world in which you can trust Russia. Just no world. It doesn't exist.
If there's no world where you can trust Russia, how do you ever have a peace agreement?
By providing military assistance to Ukraine to the extent that for Russia it would be so costly to go into Ukraine that they would not be willing to make that move. By decimating Russian economy, by putting Russia in isolation just like we did with North Korea, by basically dismantling all the channels of the Russian propaganda. This is the only way. How else can you do that? I mean, how would you come up with a peace agreement with the Nazi Germany in 1940s?
Well,
I mean, there was only one solution. There was no other solution. No other solution.
There was a peace agreement with Japan, but I guess that was only after the use of nuclear.
That was a surrender. That was a capitulation, not a peace agreement, right? And it was the full capitulation of Japan when our troops moved into Japan, into Tokyo.
We're going to take a break for some messages. When we come back, I want to ask our guest about Ukrainian sovereignty, Ukrainian security guarantees, Ukrainian territory. What needs to be considered there? What could be considered by the Ukrainian people? Why is Zelensky? Will he give up territory? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Roman Sheremeta with me tonight. He is a professor of economics at the Weatherhood School of Business, Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. He's Ukrainian. He's an expert on economics, and he's also extremely involved in what's going on, analyzing it and commentating on it in regards to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've had a great conversation, I think, about this Russian argument that they need security guarantees. What didn't come up on Friday was anything that, unless I missed it, about Ukraine's desire need for security guarantees. And it seems like, and most people are saying, that to get any kind of peace, Ukraine's going to have to give up some territory. And the territory is probably going to be something comparable to either the current front lines, or frankly, what I've heard of late is even more than the current front lines, sort of the whole eastern Donbass area. Professor, what do you think Zelensky and the Ukrainian people would accept? What is reasonable, and what do you think is going to happen?
I think that a reasonable, well, let's say acceptable solution here would be to freeze the or stop the war at the current front line. So, but that would also imply that Ukraine does not recognize the captured territories as Russians. Now, de jure, they don't recognize, but de facto, they understand that Russia holds those territories. There could be an agreement that Ukraine agrees not to use military force to recapture these territories. I see that as potential one. So Ukraine agrees that they are not going to use military force to recapture the Russian captured territories. The only means of basically integrating those territories back into Ukraine would be diplomatic, if ever, right? So that is something that is agreeable. I see no way that Ukraine would actually acknowledge from their side that these territories are de jure belong to Russia. I see that United States, especially under the current administration, could recognize that. But again, another president comes that could be, dismissed because as this comes and goes. I mean, we've already seen after the violation of Budapest Memorandum, any international law is sort of out of the window. So this is what I see as a plausible end to this war. When we freeze the front line and basically the communication starts. Now, you mentioned about swapping some territories and giving Russia the control of the full Donbas region or Zaporizhia or Kherson. There's zero chance of that happening. First of all, some of the most fortified lines of defense are around Slovyansk, Kramatorsk. Those are the major cities in Donbas, and they are the ones that have withstood even in the initial since 2014. Now, if Russia were to get, first of all, if Russia were to get those territories that are not theirs, this would literally open a whole front line, a new front line, a very easy access to Kharkiv, to Kyiv, because really there's no defenses after that, no significant defenses. Second, people in those cities, and you can go and visit them and talk to them, they don't want to live under Russia. It would be just imagine abandoning them to the Russian genocide. This doesn't make sense. So nobody would agree to that. And for Russia to capture those territories in military way, it would take them years because, as I said, those are very heavily fortified cities and territories. And even right now, with Russia's significant advances, it's like a turtle that is crawling, and trying to capture Ukraine. It would take them 100 years to capture Ukraine at this speed. So these things are not plausible. That is why the swapping of the territories, I just don't see that happening.
What's the alternative? I've heard comments like there's numerous Ukrainian men that have gone into hiding, that it's very difficult to recruit new conscripts into the Ukrainian army, that the death and the injuries to Ukrainian people, particularly obviously not just civilians, not just soldiers, but civilians, are so extensive. And I think Marco Rubio actually addressed this at one point in time when he was confronted by people talking about that famous Zelensky Trump interaction in the Oval Office. Marco Rubio, who historically has been a very ardent supporter of Ukraine, said, "Well, what's the alternative?" And maybe you could answer that by thinking about some historical examples, because some people have talked about this being like Munich, where Chamberlain gave up Czechoslovakia to Hitler. Other people have said this is more like the peace talks, the Paris peace talks on North Vietnam versus South Vietnam, where Kissinger also won the Nobel Peace Prize, but effectively removed all support to South Vietnam, and shortly thereafter, North Vietnam took over the whole country. So, is there a good analogy from history, and is there any kind of alternative to ceding territory?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I mean, there's no perfect analogy. It's not a, I don't see an analogy to Vietnam. I don't see this as an analogy to Korea either. There is more resemblance to the Munich Agreement between Chamberlain and Hitler. The reason I view that as more that along those lines um, because it was a negotiations of appeasement. It was not a solving of a problem, right? I mean, this is again this is one of those cases when it all comes down. It all will come down to what will be the security guarantees to Ukraine. Okay, if we come up with a plan to provide Ukraine with a bulletproof security guarantees, then yes, maybe we will not be like the Munich Agreement. But if we don't, then I definitely see that analogy more so than Vietnam or North South Korea kind of scenario. Now, what would those security guarantees be? Because we already gave them Ukraine those security guarantees in 1984, and they failed miserably. The only security guarantees that we would provide that would be sufficient is a membership in NATO. Or if we're not going to give membership in NATO right away, then we are talking about so much weapons and so much support that Russia would know that it's impossible for them to win this war if they ever decide to go back into this war. That's the only scenarios where we can actually assure that Ukraine has reasonable security guarantees. Otherwise, if it's going to be just, oh yeah, I promise that we will defend, we will help Ukraine, we will put more sanctions on Russia if they attack. I mean, that's going to be just laughable, right? Because it will not stop Russia. It will just give Russia a pause and then a way to rearm, to reconscript, to reshuffle some things and start a new war in 2030.
We're going to take a break for some messages, a final break, and come back with some concluding comments. And I want to know from our guest, how this is all being interpreted in the balance of Eastern Europe and the balance of NATO, because I think that's also important. You talk, sir, about joining NATO, but even Poland, I understand, is really worried about some of the current negotiations and worried that they can't trust the United States to come and defend them anymore. And so what's joining NATO worth if you can't count on the United States backing you up? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Having a really interesting conversation with Professor Sheremeta. He's an economics professor from Case Western Reserve University. He's Ukrainian. He's from Ukraine, and he's very involved in and aware of and commenting about everything that's going on. And we're talking about this Alaska summit between Putin and Trump and what, if anything, has come out of it. And we've had a good conversation about security guarantees and the cause of the invasion. And what potentially could be the solutions. You mentioned just before the break that you thought that the only security guarantee makes sense is allowing Ukraine to join NATO. I wonder if that's an empty gesture, though, because even Poland is worried, and some of the Baltics are worried. They're ramping up defense spending, above the 2.5% of GDP, up to 5% of GDP, because they worried that they have to defend themselves and they can't count on the United States. So how are some of the other frontline NATO members, allies, reacting to what's going on right now?
So there are two things here. And on the one hand, you're correct. And I've made this same line of argument about a year ago, maybe a little bit less. But basically, I would say that if Russia were to attack Baltics, I gave a very high likelihood that United States would do almost nothing. So the Article 5 would not be invoked, or at least, I mean, here's another question. Okay, how much should a NATO country do? Like, Baltic countries are attacked. Let's say United States sends 10,000 of their troops to Baltics, and a couple hundred Abrams tanks and maybe some F-16s, and then those get destroyed and 10,000 American soldiers get killed, and that's very easy for Russia. That will be just like that, in the span of a couple weeks.
So to put it in
And
perspective, I've spoken to a Canadian military expert that says the Canadian contingent that's in Latvia under a Russian attack would last less than a week unless
yeah, so that's my point.
unless
And then
US
let's say
came to defend it.
they all die. The coffins start rolling into United States, across the states, and what do you think next happens? People start suddenly defending and saying, "Let's send more troops." No, they would say, We're not going to send anything more," and so there would be just nothing going in. But so yes, on the one hand, it doesn't mean much. But at the same time, because of Russia's aggression, all of the countries, NATO countries, have increased their spending, military defense. Germany, including, which is one of the juggernauts in NATO, France, and of course the Baltic countries and Poland and other countries. So my point is, the NATO has become much stronger, and it will become stronger year after year. So when something like this happens, there will be much more capacity from each of the country to help collectively one another. So because NATO is becoming stronger over the next, let's say, 10 years, I actually do have more faith in NATO. And hopefully by that time, Trump gets out of the picture. I mean, he's the old guy, and so nobody lives forever. And so maybe we're going to get back to some sort of normalcy. Maybe there will be even restoration to a normal Republican Party that I've always been for. I mean, I'm a more Republican leaning than I as an economist. I'm a libertarian. I believe in free markets. I believe in a small government. I believe in strong military. Literally, a lot of points that just hit with the Republican Party. But today, I don't recognize this party anymore. And so my hope is, if there is a shift more towards this kind of Reagan type of Republican Party, we will actually see stronger NATO in the long run. And being a part of NATO would actually be a very significant deterrent.
I don't think this is a Republican Party today. I think it's a MAGA party, but that's my own personal point of view.
I agree with you.
What can we all do? What can Canadians do? What can Americans do? What can the coalition of the willing do? What can people other than Donald Trump do in this situation?
Well, if we're talking about Americans, I think Americans need to raise their voice, and they have been raising voices. We can see that the support for Ukraine is very strong. In fact, if you look at the recent polls, the number of people that actually support giving Ukraine more weapons is now back to 2022. So in mostly this comes from the Republican and independent people. So it's actually the Republican Party, or not party, but people who affiliate themselves with the Republican Party, that have now voiced out and saying we need to provide Ukraine with weapons. So if you're an American, you have to start hammering your representatives, congressmen, senators, especially from the Republican side. The midterm elections are coming in. They will want to satisfy their electorate, so they will be pushing for aid to Ukraine. And so we need to provide Ukraine with all the tools necessary. If we're talking about Canada, European countries, I think we as a whole collective need to stand up to the bully. And by the bully, unfortunately, today, I also mean the United States, not only Russia. We need to support Ukraine and support one another. When Trump is going to throw Ukraine under the bus, the only way for Europe to kind of step up will be to actually provide more commitments, more support to Ukraine, that Russia will have no way but to sit down, meaningfully sit down at the negotiation table and finish this bloody war.
To lead that, I really think we need a Churchill. Is there anyone? Is there a president of France, or a prime minister of Britain, or a prime minister of Canada, or someone that you see, maybe the chancellor of Germany, that is playing the role of Churchill today?
This is a great question. I don't think there is a standalone leader, but the people that you mentioned are definitely the ones that I've gained to respect because, I was critical about many of these individuals in the past, but I see them stepping up and actually doing something. Had probably more hopes for the German chancellor. Unfortunately, didn't materialize yet as much, but it's a move in the right direction. But I do not see a single individual on the world arena right now that would take that role.
Roman Sheremeta, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you. I think this is going to be an issue we're going to be following very closely. And so I really appreciate your attention tonight and our guests' participation. I think that this is maybe Munich, as you said, but I really worry that the Trump strategy is more akin to what happened with the Paris Treaty, where the United States effectively gave up. I had a guest on a month ago that said this was more akin to Afghanistan, where the United States just sort of gave up and gave into the Taliban. So whether we're giving into the Taliban or whether we're giving into North Vietnam or whether we're giving into Hitler, all of them are pretty bad comparables, and I think that we need to do what we can as a collective to tell our leaders that people shouldn't be able to take territory through violence and through military action. It's just a world of 1940s that we don't want to repeat today. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Good night.